The door closes with a heavy, padded thud. The smoke in the room hangs so thick you could slice it. It's October 1935, the heart of Westminster, and a dozen men in crumpled suits are passing folded slips of paper into a wooden box. In 1 hour, that box will decide who leads the Labour Party. In 1 hour, it may decide who leads Britain itself. Standing just outside, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes, is a stocky man with a stiff jaw and a single sharp eye that misses nothing. His name is Herbert Morrison. He has lost elections, lost his seat in Parliament, almost lost his entire political career. But he believes, with the stubborn certainty of a self-made man, that this moment is his. Inside the room, another figure sits quietly, hands folded, almost anonymous in his gray suit. Clement Attlee, understated, soft-voiced, easy to overlook. Morrison is betting that history will overlook Attlee too. He's betting that the future belongs to him. The clock is ticking. In 60 minutes, the boy who once stood barefoot on a Lambeth pavement, staring at the butcher's window he couldn't afford to enter. He will discover if he has finally broken through the ceiling that has hovered over him his entire life. But to understand why this hour matters so much, why it carries the weight of decades, we have to start far from Westminster, in a world of coal dust, broken glass, and the rattle of horse-drawn carts on wet London stones. Because Herbert Morrison's story doesn't begin in power, it begins in pain. London, 1888. The city is a living machine. Gears of poverty grinding against polished brass. In a cramped house in Lambeth, above the smell of river mud and chimney smoke, a child is born to a policeman and his wife. They call him Herbert Stanley Morrison. There is nothing in this small, fragile baby to suggest that one day he will redesign London, that he will sit in war cabinets, that his signature will be scrawled beneath the documents that shape the post-war world. What will shape him first is not ambition. It is injury. He is still a boy when it happens. A street, a fall, a shard of glass, and suddenly there is blood and screaming. The wound in his eye is deep, and medicine in late Victorian London is as unforgiving as the streets themselves. Infection sets in. Pain burns behind his face. By the time the bandages come off, one eye will never see again. Imagine that moment. The boy, blinking against the light. The silence in the room as adults realize what's been lost. One eye gone, his face marked forever. His future apparently narrowed not by his choices but by random chance and broken glass. It is the London County Council that pays him compensation for the accident. A few coins, a formal letter, a bureaucratic gesture. No one in that office can imagine that one day this damaged boy will be the one sitting at the head of that very council, ruling the city that maimed him. For now, all he knows is that life will not be gentle. He leaves school at 14. Not because he wants to, but because he has to. There is no cushion of family money, no distant uncle ready to pay for university. While the sons of the wealthy debate the classics at Oxford, Herbert is running errands, working in a shop, trying anything that will keep bread on the table. He sees London from the delivery entrance, not the front door. From the pavement, not the carriage. But it's in those long walks, those bus rides and tram journeys, that something begins to burn inside him. He watches the contrast, the glittering streets of the West End, the gas lamps glowing on polished stone. And then, 3 stops later, the stink of slums, 10 people to a room, coughing in the dark. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel necessary. It feels like a choice that someone else has made about his life, and the lives of millions like him. So he decides he's going to spend his life fighting the people who made that choice. Politics enters his life not through a textbook, but through a pamphlet pressed into his hand in a drafty hall, through a voice, echoing off bare brick walls. He listens to speakers from the Independent Labour Party talking about socialism, about power for working people, about a new kind of Britain. These aren't just ideas to him. They are a map out of the narrow streets he has always known. Herbert Morrison throws himself into the labor movement like a man jumping onto a moving train. He attends every meeting he can. He speaks, at first nervously, then with growing confidence. He learns the mechanics of politics the hard way, by counting chairs, checking lists, knocking on doors. There is a rhythm to his rise. Local committee, borough council, the slow, grinding climb of a man with no title, no wealth, no university, but an almost frightening capacity for work. In Hackney, where poverty presses against every brick, he becomes a name you can't ignore. He organizes, negotiates, persuades. He studies the labyrinth of local government, budgets, committee structures, obscure regulations, and discovers something important. If you know how the machine works, you can make it do things it was never designed to do. While others chase grand theories, Morrison chases bus routes, housing plans, water supply, cheap electricity, the unglamorous stuff. The circuitry of daily life. It is here, in the gritty detail of civic administration, that his genius begins to show. But genius doesn't guarantee success, especially in British politics. He reaches Parliament in 1923, winning Hackney South for Labour. It should be a moment of triumph. The boy from the back streets has a seat in the House of Commons. He walks through the great doors, under the carved stone, into the chamber he has dreamed of. And then, like a cruel joke, the door swings shut almost immediately. The government falls. A new election comes. Morrison loses his seat. One memorable evening, he walks out of Parliament not as an MP, but as an unemployed man with his ambitions dangling by a thread. This will not be the last time. In 1929, he claws his way back. In 1931, in the catastrophic collapse of labor after the national government is formed, he is thrown out again, swept away in a tidal wave of defeat. Think about that. Twice elected, twice rejected, twice forced to stare into the void where his future was supposed to be. Many would have walked away. Many did. But Morrison is stubborn. Perhaps it is the memory of childhood helplessness, of that random shard of glass stealing his sight, that makes him so determined. That nothing else will be left to chance. If Westminster doesn't want him, he'll build his power somewhere else. That somewhere else is London itself. Between the wars, London is a battlefield. Less of guns and tanks, more of plans and budgets. The London County Council controls housing, transport, education, hospitals. To win it is to win the bones and arteries of the capital. And it is here, in smoky committee rooms and crowded rallies, that another rivalry starts to take shape. Because while Herbert Morrison is carving out his empire in London, another Labour man is quietly strengthening his influence in Parliament. Clement Attlee. They are almost opposites. Morrison is loud, sharp, impatient. He loves a microphone, a packed hall, the roar of a crowd. He thinks in networks, systems, hierarchies he can bend to his will. Attlee is understated, almost shy in public but rock solid inside. Where Morrison sees politics as engineering, Attlee sees it as duty. He is not dazzled by London. He is content to sit in committee rooms late into the night, listening more than speaking. To Morrison, Attlee initially feels like background noise. A gray man in a gray suit. Certainly not a rival. Not yet. Morrison's rival, as he sees it in the early 1930s, is someone much more immediate. Time. Because after losing his parliamentary seat in 1931, the clock begins to tick. He is in his 40s. Political careers are brittle. You don't get endless second chances in Britain's ruthless two-party arena. If he doesn't find a solid base of power soon, he will sink into the fog of might-have-beens that hangs over Westminster like smog. So he makes a bet. A risky one. He will turn the London County Council, long dominated by Conservatives and their allies, into a fortress of Labour power, and he will do it fast. There is a date circled in red in his mind. The 1934 LCC elections. If he fails to seize London then, he knows he may never climb back to the national stage. Less than 2 years. That's the time he has to prepare. 2 years to find candidates, raise money, craft a vision, sell it to millions of Londoners. 2 years to convince a city still half in love with its empire that a one-eyed socialist from Lambeth should be trusted with their homes, their trams, their children's schools. The scale of the task is staggering, but Morrison thrives on scale. He studies the map of London like a general with a war table, sweeps his finger across Southwark, Lambeth, Hackney, Tower Hamlets. He knows the estates, the alleys, the railway lines, the markets. He knows where people queue for water, where the buses don't run, where the rats are fatter than the cats. And he decides on a strategy. Not grand slogans, but concrete promises. Better housing, with real bricks and real plumbing. Cheap, efficient public transport. A coordinated system of hospitals, parks and open spaces for children who currently play in rubble and traffic. He doesn't talk in abstract terms about socialism. He talks about the price of the weekly tram ticket and the location of the nearest clinic. While he works, the ghosts of his past hang over him. He still remembers being compensated, as a child, by this very council he's now trying to capture. The irony is not lost on him. The same machine that paid him hush money for his lost eye is now the machine he wants to rewire entirely. Meanwhile, in Parliament, Clement Attlee is making his own quiet climb. He has survived the disaster of 1931. He has not lost his seat. He sits in the Commons as the Labour benches shrink around him. He watches, listens, calculates. They meet occasionally, Morrison and Attlee, in the corridors, in meetings, at party gatherings. Morrison talks fast, eyes bright, hands chopping the air. London this, transport that, the Tories are vulnerable here, we must hit them there. Attlee nods, says little, files it all away. For now, they are nominally on the same side. But the shape of future conflict is already there, invisible, like the blueprint of a building not yet constructed. As 1934 approaches, the pressure on Morrison intensifies. The Conservatives have ruled the LCC for nearly 3 decades. They are embedded in its culture, its habits, its comfortable assumptions. Many Londoners can't even imagine a different power running their city. Morrison knows he cannot simply promise to be not them. He has to make London feel the urgency he feels, so he sharpens his message. He paints pictures. Families in rotting tenements, coughing up black mucus, children doing homework by smoky gaslight, men leaving home at dawn, trudging miles to work because the tram network ignores their street. He contrasts that with gleaming offices in the city, bright lights in the West End, the polished banisters in gentlemen's clubs. He speaks not as a theorist, but as someone who has lived what he describes. Crowds respond. They may not know the intricacies of municipal finance, but they know the sting of cold when the landlord won't fix the windows. They know what it is to feel that the city belongs to someone else. Morrison gives them something dangerous, the sense that the city could belong to them instead. The campaign becomes furious. Every evening, another meeting. Every morning, another strategy huddle. Leaflets, posters, banners on trams. Morrison drives his team hard. He drives himself harder. Behind the speeches is that ruthless internal countdown. If he fails now, the door back to national influence may slam shut forever. And, unseen by most, another countdown is beginning too. Across the Channel, in Germany, a new regime is settling in. Flags with crooked crosses, torchlit parades, burning books. The world is darkening. Whoever controls London's apparatus in the years ahead may find themselves not just managing bus timetables, but preparing a city for war. Morrison doesn't yet know the full extent of that storm, but he feels something coming. All the more reason, in his mind, to make sure London is in safe hands. His hands? Election day in 1934 arrives like a held breath. Ballot boxes fill, are sealed, are taken away. Morrison walks the streets, shaking hands, forcing smiles, scanning faces for signs of hope or despair. When the results come in, they feel almost unreal. Labour has done it. The grip of the Conservatives on the London County Council is broken. Herbert Morrison is now the leader of London's government. The boy who once received a small check from the LCC as compensation for a ruined eye now holds the entire institution in his hands. It is a twist history itself might have considered too implausible if it were not true. Power, at last. Not the green benches of the Commons, but the levers that make a city move. For Morrison, it is both vindication and a new form of pressure, because now he has to deliver on every word he shouted from those drafty stages. And somewhere in Westminster, Clement Attlee reads the headlines, notes Morrison's triumph, and quietly updates his mental landscape of the party. A powerful new baron has emerged, rooted not in Parliament, but in a city that could be a launching pad for national leadership. The competition between them is still undeclared, but the race has begun. Which brings us back to that smoky room in 1935 and the wooden box filling with folded ballot papers. In the years since seizing London, Morrison has turned his newfound power into political capital. He has become not just the voice of Labour London, but a contender for the leadership of the entire party. The old leader, George Lansbury, has resigned under pressure. A vacancy has opened at the very top. For Morrison, the calculation is brutal and simple. This is the chance he has been waiting for his entire life. But he is not alone in seeing it. Attlee is standing too. Reluctantly, he insists, pushed forward by colleagues who value his steadiness in a time of crisis. Where Morrison brings energy and spectacle, Attlee brings calm and reliability. The choice before Labour MPs is stark. The brilliant city boss or the quiet parliamentarian. The time limit is very real now. Not years, not months, barely an hour until the box is sealed. Then the counting. Then the result. Morrison waits in the corridor, that single good eye fixed on the door as if he can force it to open sooner. He thinks of Lambeth, of the glass and the blood, of the compensation coins on the kitchen table, of every election won and lost, every speech, every late-night meeting in some drafty church hall. He thinks of London, now under his control, of what he could do with the entire country at his back. Somewhere nearby, Attlee sits alone, expression unreadable, as though he already knows that history rarely bends to the will of any one man, however determined. The seconds slide away. The box is lifted, carried into another room. The papers are spilled out, unfolded, counted. For Herbert Morrison, the boy from the broken streets who has clawed his way here through defeat and reinvention, this is the moment when everything he has built may either crystallize into the leadership he craves or dissolve into yet another defeat he will have to survive. Outside, London goes on. Trams rumbling, fog thickening, the river flowing black under the bridges. Unaware that behind the stone walls of Westminster, a decision is being made that will shape not only the life of one one-eyed politician, but the fate of a party that will one day govern a nation on the brink of its gravest trial. And as the counting continues, as hands move faster over piles of marked slips, the balance between Morrison and his quiet rival shifts, paper by paper, towards an outcome that will define not just his future, but the entire next act of British politics. The moment the envelope is opened, Herbert Morrison knows. The man at the table barely moves, just a slight tightening around the mouth, a flicker of the eyes, and then the numbers are read out. Names, votes, totals. Neat, clinical murder of a dream. Clement Attlee has won. By the time the final tally is spoken, the sound in the room has gone flat. No gasp, no cheer, just a low murmur like distant traffic. It takes a second for the meaning to settle on every pair of shoulders present. The quiet man, the stopgap, the one who was supposed to be a placeholder, is now leader of the Labour Party. Herbert Morrison stands very still. For a second, he is back in Lambeth. The shock, the white-hot pain, the jag of glass, the world going dark in one eye. This feels like that. A sudden, irreversible wound. Only this time, no council will send money. There will be no compensation for this loss. He had believed, with almost religious certainty, that the leadership was his. He had London. He had charisma. He had a story that reached from slum pavements to County Hall. Attlee had... what? A reputation for reliability and a voice barely louder than a whisper. Yet when it came to it, Labour MPs had chosen the whisper over the roar. He shakes hands, because that's what politics demands. Attlee's grip is dry, firm, untriumphant. If Morrison hoped to see gloating in his rival's eyes, he is disappointed. There is only that same, slightly guarded calm, as if Attlee knows that in a world darkening by the day, any leadership is more burden than prize. Morrison walks out into the corridor, face in shadow. The clock on the wall beats out each second like a taunt. He is 47 years old. He has climbed from nothing, twice entered Parliament and twice been thrown out, seized control of London. And still, somehow, he is second best. How many more chances will there be? The answer, although he cannot know it yet, is not many. And each will be more dangerous, more urgent, more entangled with the fate of Britain itself. Power rejected in Westminster, Morrison turns back to the power he does hold. London. Across the river from Parliament, County Hall looms over the Thames, a vast stone arch wrapped around a central courtyard. Inside, the air smells of tobacco, wet wool, and paper. This is Morrison's fortress. If he cannot yet rule the nation, he will show the nation what rule under him looks like. He attacks London's problems not as a philosopher, but as an engineer with a toolbox and a deadline. The housing lists are a scandal. Families jammed 10 to a room, children sleeping 3 to a bed, tuberculosis breeding in damp walls. Morrison's answer is not another speech, but bricks and mortar. He pushes through vast building programs, new council estates with indoor toilets, proper kitchens, sunlight in the windows instead of fungus. He reorganizes rents, fights slum landlords, battles civil servants who complain that things have always been done this way. He doesn't care how things have always been done. He cares how quickly they can be changed. Transport is next. London's buses, trams, and underground lines are a patchwork of competing companies, overcharging, under-coordinating, each jealously guarding its own routes. Commuters pay the price in wasted hours and empty wallets. Morrison wants to weld the whole shuttering network into a single, public system. His opponents call it socialism by stealth. He calls it common sense. The fights in committee are brutal. Private owners rage. Newspapers thunder about municipal tyranny. and lawyers sharpen their arguments. Morrison sits at the head of the table, one eye fixed, voice steady, reciting statistics with the patience of an executioner reading last rites. Underneath the calm, he is counting, calculating, pushing. The result is London Transport, a unified authority that turns chaos into something approaching order. New red buses, clearer routes, a sense that the city actually cares how its people move. He finds time for beauty as well as efficiency. Parks and open spaces appear where there were once only derelict lots and rubble. To some, trees and grass seem luxuries. To Morrison, they are necessities for a class of people who have lived their lives in brick canyons. Behind every project, there is a political purpose. He is building not just a better city, but a case study. Proof that labor and power can be competent, modern, transformative. County Hall is his showroom, the place where he can say to the rest of Britain, "Look what we did here." Imagine it everywhere. Newspapers, even some that hate his politics, begin to call him the uncrowned King of London. In private, he savors the phrase. In public, he shrugs it off. Yet the word uncrowned stings. Because every day he walks out onto the balcony of County Hall and looks upriver, towards Westminster, where Clement Attlee now leads. The party that Herbert Morrison always believed he should command. The rivalry is no longer theoretical, it is geographic. Concrete. Two centers of gravity pulling in different directions. As the 1930s grind on, the tension in Europe grows thicker than the London fog. Hitler rearms. Mussolini invades Abyssinia. Spain burns. The old peace crumbles in slow motion, while the British government of Stanley Baldwin, then Neville Chamberlain, offers reassurances, washed down with appeasement. Morrison watches this from his dual vantage point. London's boss, and since the 1935 general election, once again a member of Parliament for Hackney South. He rides the boat between County Hall and Westminster, often twice a day, a man split between two arenas. In the Commons, he hammers the government over air raid precautions and civil defense. He knows London's vulnerability more intimately than most. He has walked the narrow streets that would become fire traps, seen schools that would crumble under a single direct hit. He presses for shelters, sirens, coordination. The response is sluggish, complacent. The ghosts of the last war whisper in ministers' ears. It can't be that bad again. It won't be here. But Morrison is not so sure. His London County Council begins planning anyway, drawing up schemes, training staff, sketching evacuation routes. County Hall becomes a war room before war is even declared. Once again, there is a clock ticking, though no one can read its face. When will the bombs fall? And when they do, who will have prepared their people and who will have left them to burn? In the Labour Party, the question of leadership is far from settled. Attlee may be at the top, but there are constant murmurs. He is too quiet. He lacks flair. Can he really lead the nation if war comes? And always, hovering behind those doubts, one name, Morrison. He plays the long game, visits constituencies far from London, speaks at conferences, frames London's successes as a template for a future Labour government. He never openly challenges Attlee. He is too clever for that. But every well-publicized housing estate, every efficient bus route, every new park sends a coded message to the party faithful. This is what leadership looks like. Then, in September 1939, the clock runs out. Germany invades Poland. Britain declares war. Gas masks are issued. Lights go out across London. The era of speculation is over. Now everything is real. War reshapes politics overnight. Chamberlain's government staggers under the weight of early failures. The phony war turns suddenly lethal with the fall of Norway, the collapse of France. The evacuation at Dunkirk looks heroic, only because the alternative was annihilation. In May 1940, the crisis breaks. Chamberlain is finished. A new leader must be chosen, fast, to form a national coalition before the country tears itself apart in panic and blame. The Conservative Party turns finally to Winston Churchill. Churchill, in turn, must choose which Labour figures to bring into his wartime cabinet. He needs men with popular legitimacy, administrative experience, the trust of the trade unions, and he needs them now. Herbert Morrison's phone rings. The offer is Minister of Supply, a crucial job in a war economy, responsible for turning Britain's factories into engines of armaments. It is a seat at the top table, at last, the kind of national responsibility he has hungered for since those barefoot days in Lambeth. He accepts. But the twist is bitter. Clement Attlee is brought into the coalition too, with an even more central role. Lord Privy Seal, effectively, deputy leader in the government, the quiet shadow to Churchill's roaring lion. The two men sit across from each other at the cabinet table. Outside, the air raid sirens wail. Inside, the rivalry sharpens. As Minister of Supply, Morrison is plunged into a storm of numbers, production quotas, steel tonnages, labor shortages. The pressure is almost physically crushing. If he fails, soldiers at the front go without weapons, planes fly without bullets, ships without depth charges. He pushes, bullies, negotiates, improvises. He visits factories at dawn, calls emergency meetings at midnight, harangues managers who say they can't possibly retool that quickly. Can't possibly becomes a phrase he hates with visceral intensity. But a different role calls to him more urgently: the defense of London itself. In the late summer of 1940, as the German Luftwaffe turns its target from airfields to cities, the real fear begins. Not just soldiers dying abroad, but families dying in their own beds. Churchill can feel the mood of the city more keenly than most politicians. He has walked its ruined streets before. He knows that if London cracks, Britain cracks. He reshuffles his team. Herbert Morrison is moved from Supply and appointed Home Secretary and Minister of Home Security, the man directly responsible for the safety and morale of civilians, the civilian commander of the home front. This, in many ways, is the job he was born for. He takes charge of air raid precautions, fire services, civil defense, the coordination between local authorities and central government. Every raid, every bomb, every burning street is now his responsibility. The night sky turns orange over London. Buildings roar as they collapse. Streets glow with molten glass. Children sleep in tube stations, mothers clutching them as dust drifts from the ceiling with every distant detonation. Morrison doesn't watch this from a bunker. He insists on visiting bomb sites while fires still burn. He walks through smoking ruins, one eye streaming from the acrid air, hat pulled low against the sparks. He clasps blackened hands, climbs over broken stairs, listens to people who have lost everything. It is dangerous, some say reckless. One direct hit, one collapsing wall, and the man many see as Labour's future could be snuffed out in a second. But Morrison understands something deeper than personal risk. In a democracy, power is a relationship. If the people do not see their leaders stand with them under falling bombs, the relationship dies. So he walks and listens and promises. In those nights of hellfire, the rivalry with Attlee slips for a time into the background. There is simply too much to do, but it never entirely disappears. Attlee, as Deputy Prime Minister in all but name, sits with Churchill in the War Cabinet, shaping strategy, representing Labour's view in the most secret councils of war. Morrison, dealing with the civilian front, builds his own power base among local authorities, civil servants, ordinary Londoners. Two men, two kinds of leadership, both necessary, both incomplete. When Churchill looks around his cabinet table, he sees in them the two faces of the future. Attlee's steadiness, Morrison's dynamism, and somewhere, deep in his mind, he knows that one day the roar of war will fade, and Britain will turn to one of these men to build the peace. By 1944, the war's end is finally visible on the horizon, a faint, wavering line of hope behind the smoke. The D-Day landings wrench open Hitler's Western Front. The Red Army pushes from the east. V-1 and V-2 rockets still fall on London, but panic has been tempered into a hard, almost defiant fatigue. People keep going to work. Trains keep running. The machinery of daily life, bolted together in large part by Morrison's Home Office, continues to function under punishment that would have shattered most cities on Earth. And inside the Labour Party, a different machinery is starting to turn. Everyone knows an election is coming soon after the war ends. Churchill intends to stand again, cloaking himself in victory. But Britain will not be voting just on war leadership. It will be voting on the peace to come, on housing, healthcare, jobs, the shape of the state itself. Labour senses its moment. The party has gained credibility in the coalition, proved itself responsible, patriotic, capable of governing. Its program for post-war reconstruction is ambitious, even radical. National health service, full employment, a welfare state. The kind of state that a boy like Herbert Morrison, shivering in a Lambeth backroom, could only have dreamed of. The question is, who will lead it into that election? On paper, the answer is straightforward. Clement Attlee is party leader. He has stood loyally by Churchill in the War Cabinet, earned respect across the spectrum, never once let personal ambition threaten unity at the front. But beneath the surface, discontent simmers. Some in the party think Attlee is too mild, too gray, too easily overshadowed by Churchill's rhetoric. The coming election, they argue, will not be won by quiet competence alone. It will need electricity, connection, a leader who can unleash the pent-up hopes of a population that has been holding its breath for 6 brutal years. They look once again at Herbert Morrison. He doesn't need to campaign openly. Others do it for him, floating his name in conversations, in smoky backrooms, in letters and whispers. They speak of his record at the LCC, his visibility during the Blitz, his skill on the platform. The idea gathers mass. Perhaps before the election, Labour should change its leader. The proposal is breathtaking in its potential consequences. To unseat Attlee, in the lull between war and peace, would be to risk everything the party has gained. It would also be Morrison's last best chance to claim the post that slipped through his fingers in 1935. He is no fool. He knows the arithmetic of age. He is in his mid-50s now, hair thinning, lines deepening around that single sharp eye. Leadership in peacetime tends to favor the relatively young, the ones who can promise decades of future. If he waits much longer, he will become what the British fear most in their politicians. Yesterday's man. Time, once again, is closing in. The plot, for that is what it is, however politely wrapped, reaches Attlee's ears. For a man often dismissed as mild, his response is anything but. He calls a meeting with the would-be kingmakers, looks each of them in the face, asks in his measured, quiet way whether they truly believe the party should throw itself into a leadership contest on the eve of a general election in front of a nation exhausted by war. Then, in words that will become legendary in Labour lore, he tells them, in essence, if you want me out, you will have to push me out in the open. I will not go quietly. No backroom deal. No graceful, face-saving exit. If they want Morrison in, they must publicly topple the man who has carried them through war. Suddenly, the blood drains from the idea. No one wants to be seen knifing Clem weeks before the first true peacetime election in a decade. The plot collapses under its own cowardice. Morrison is left where he has been for years. Powerful, admired, tantalizingly close, and not quite there. Attlee remains leader. But the episode leaves scars. Trust phrase. The rivalry between the quiet man and the one-eyed engineer of cities hardens into something colder, more brittle. They still sit together, still plan together, still speak publicly of unity. Privately, each knows the other once tried, or at least allowed others to try, to erase him. The clock ticks towards polling day. Summer 1945, bomb sites are still raw wounds in the cityscape. Ration books bulge in pockets. Demobbed soldiers step uncertainly back onto streets that don't quite feel like home. The election campaign begins. Churchill, the hero of 1940, expects gratitude. He warns that a Labour government, with its talk of planning and nationalization, would need a Gestapo to enforce its program. The words are a miscalculation. Ugly, tone-deaf, out of step with the people who have just fought fascism and are in no mood to be lectured on liberty by a man who never queued for an orange. Labour offers something very different. Housing, schools, a health service free at the point of need, work, security from the cradle to the grave, and, behind the manifesto, two competing visions of leadership, awkwardly sharing the same stage. Attlee, thin, restrained, talks in that dry, precise way of his about duty, justice, fair shares. Morrison, crisscrossing the country, thunders about what we did in London and what we can do for Britain. He is the campaign's showman, the organizer, the man who translates the abstract hope of a fairer Britain into images of real homes with real roofs. If Attlee is the mind of the campaign, Morrison is its bloodstream. He works himself to the edge of collapse. Early trains, late meetings, speeches in echoing halls that smell of damp wood and cigarettes. He stands on makeshift platforms in bombed-out boroughs, describing, in vivid, almost tactile detail, the new estates, the new clinics, the new schools that could rise from the rubble. Every cheer feeds a quiet, forbidden thought. If this goes right enough, if my work wins this election, perhaps the party will see where the true leadership lies. He doesn't voice it, but it's there, beating in time with his racing heart. Polling day arrives. Britain files into schools and church halls, factories and town halls to mark their crosses. For once, bombs do not fall on the queues. The count is slow, stretched over days that feel like years. Then the scale of it becomes impossible to ignore. Seat after seat, town after town, industrial belt after bomb-scarred suburb. Labor victories, not narrow squeaks but landslides. Whole swathes of the map turning red. Churchill, the savior of 1940, the voice that told them they would fight on the beaches, is not just defeated, he is crushed. Labor has won an absolute majority, the greatest in its history. In the jubilation, the cheers, the tears of veterans who never thought they'd see such a day, one question hangs silently in the charged air. Who now will be Prime Minister? On one level, the answer is obvious. The king sends for Clement Attlee, the party's elected leader, the man whose name was on the ballot as such. Protocol, precedent, political logic all point in one direction. Yet Morrison, standing in the glow of victory he has helped to engineer, cannot keep a thin blade of hope from sliding between these facts. There are still backroom conversations, still possibilities. Attlee is respected, admired even. But is he truly the one to take this blazing mandate and hammer it into a new state? Or is he still, as some muttered in 1935, the man you choose when you can't agree on anyone else? The answer arrives in a single, simple act. Clement Attlee goes to Buckingham Palace and kisses hands. He becomes Prime Minister. Herbert Morrison is not summoned to become Britain's leader. He is summoned to become something else. Deputy Prime Minister, Lord President of the Council, the man who will run vast swathes of the new administration's machinery, but will always sit one chair to the side. He accepts. What else can he do? To refuse would be to betray everything he has fought for since he first listened to socialist speeches in drafty halls as a teenager. He wants the program, the reforms, the new Britain, as fiercely as Attlee does. Yet as he walks into Downing Street behind the slight, self-contained figure of Clement Attlee, the contrast is almost brutal. The one-eyed boy from Lambeth, who out-organized London, who faced bombs and fire, who has been twice the nearly man of Labour leadership, is finally at the very heart of power, but not at its apex. He has climbed the mountain only to find that the flag at the summit already bears another man's name, and somewhere behind the fresh paint on the doors of ministries, behind the files stacked high with plans for housing, health, and industry, another timer is set in motion, measuring not shells or sirens this time, but patience, loyalty, and the fragile, flickering chance that, even now, Herbert Morrison might yet seize the one prize that has slipped away from him for more than a decade. The door of number 10 shuts with a soft click, and in that moment the greatest revolution in modern British history begins. With a man who didn't get the job, all the photographs, all the statues, all the schoolbook summaries will later say, the Attlee government. But in the maze of corridors behind that famous black door, through the fog of cigarette smoke and the rustle of cabinet papers, another truth moves like a shadow. If Attlee is the name on the brass plate, Herbert Morrison is the hand on the levers. He is not Prime Minister. He is not the face on the front pages. But as Lord President of the Council, Deputy Prime Minister, Chair of the crucial domestic committees, he is handed something almost more intoxicating than a title. The practical control of how a war-ravaged kingdom will be rebuilt. And there is no time. Britain in 1945 is not a victor basking in glory. It is a tired, bomb-pocked, half-starved country with its economy hanging by a thread. Cities are cratered, factories worn thin, railways buckling under strain. Millions of men are waiting to be demobilized. Women who kept the factories running now fear being sent back to nothing. Morrison looks at the first blizzard of departmental memoranda and understands with engineers' clarity. They have perhaps 5 years. 5 years before gratitude for victory fades into bitterness, before austerity corrodes hope, before tired voters decide dreams are a luxury they can't afford. 5 years. That is the window. He intends to drive a freight train through it. By day, he presides over the Lord President's Committee, the eerie, fluorescent-lit engine room of Attlee's government, where the blueprints for a new Britain are thrashed out. By night, he prowls through red ministerial boxes, annotated papers spreading over his desk like a second city. This one built in ink and willpower, nationalization of the Bank of England, of coal, of railways, of electricity and gas, a planning system for towns and countryside, new towns rising from fields like concrete exclamation marks, a national health service that still exists only as lines on a civil servant's draft. The scale would make most men flinch. Morrison sharpens his pencil. He has always preferred systems to slogans. Now he turns ideology into timetables. The cabinet may agree a principle, but it is Morrison who says, by when, through which ministry, Funded how? In what sequence? So the country does not simply seize up under the strain. He has learned from London that you can move mountains if you know in which order to dig. Yet every time he walks into the cabinet room, the contrast stares back at him like a cruel joke. At the head of the table, impassive, mild, apparently unhurried, Clement Attlee. At his side, never quite at the center, the one-eyed bruiser from Lambeth. Prime Minister, Deputy, Leader, Engineer. Two men harnessed to the same immense task, but each step forward also tightens the knot of their rivalry. Every achievement of the government adds another layer to the question that hangs, unspoken, over Whitehall. When Attlee eventually stands down, whose Britain will this be remembered as? The new Britain doesn't begin with trumpets. It begins with paperwork. Coal first. For generations, pits have been private kingdoms. Black, dangerous empires of profit where men cough their lungs out by 45. Now, in a series of acts and orders and late-night sessions, Morrison helps prize them out of private hands and fold them into a public corporation. He is in his element. Committees, subcommittees, liaison boards. He glides between them like a conductor, beating time. On the morning coal nationalization formally takes effect, miners hoist Union Jacks outside pitheads, once marked by the names of distant owners. The photographs show beaming faces smeared with coal dust, hard helmets decorated with paper rosettes. Behind those images lies months of Morrison's unglamorous grind. Rows over compensation, timetables, pension liabilities, the invisible, screws that hold the great machine together. Railways follow. Then electricity. 1,000 chaotic private undertakings strung into a single grid. Morrison loves the elegance of it. The idea of current surging across the country, no longer trapped within the patchwork of petty fiefdoms. Gas, too, is wrestled into coherence. Industries that defined the Victorian world are quietly repurposed for a very un-Victorian dream. That something as basic as light and heat should not depend on where you were born or how much you inherited. But nationalization is only one front. Housing haunts him. He knows in his bones that all the talk of New Jerusalem will dissolve into cynicism if men who fought at Caen and El Alamein come home to damp, rat-infested rooms. So while Aneurin Bevan is tasked with health and housing on paper, Morrison's committees chew over the planning laws that will decide what can actually be built and where. The Town and Country Planning Act, dry in its phrasing, is revolutionary in its effect. For the first time, private ownership of land does not automatically mean the right to do whatever you like with it. Councils can shape skylines. Green belts can be protected. New towns, Stevenage, Harlow, Crawley, are sketched like utopian diagrams on ordnance survey maps. To Morrison, this is the logical extension of what he did in London. But the canvas is now the entire country. He pushes. Civil servants complain that the machinery is overstretched, that the pace is madness. Conservative newspapers warn of a Soviet-style command state. Even some labor colleagues mutter about the Morrisonian machine, a web of committees and controls that, they fear, might stifle local initiative. He hears them. He doesn't slow. The clock doesn't care if officials are tired. The next election date still crawls nearer across the calendar. Somewhere out in the smoky clubrooms and church halls, the voters are counting too. How long will rationing last? When will queues shorten? Where is my home, my clinic, my relief from this endless gray? Morrison knows. If the government does not deliver visible change before impatience curdles, all their bright paper plans will end. In a bonfire of lost trust, he drives the system like a man trying to squeeze 10 years of progress into 5. The trouble with building a new state at breakneck speed is that something always threatens to crack. In 1947, the crack nearly becomes a chasm. That winter is a season of punishment. Snow grips the country. Coal stocks, misjudged, mismanaged, simply exhausted by years of strain, run desperately low. Power stations falter. Factories stand idle. Housewives wrap blankets around shivering children as radio bulletins announce yet more cuts. The newspapers have a new villain, the planned state that somehow didn't plan enough coal. Morrison, as the public face of so much domestic policy, finds himself in the firing line. He goes on the radio, into the Commons, onto platforms and half-lit town halls to explain and to plead. He talks of war weariness, of foreign currency drains, of the sheer cost of rebuilding. He talks of the Marshall Plan, of dollars and deficits. Above all, he talks of sacrifice. One last great effort so that the foundations they are laying will not crumble. The tone is pure Morrison, a mix of hard numbers and emotional insistence. He invokes not Marx, but simple fairness, that those who have given so much already should not see the scaffolding knocked away now. Some listen. Others hear only another politician telling them to make do and mend, while the elite seem mysteriously untouched. Inside the cabinet, strains deepen. On one flank stands Aneurin Bevan, the fiery Welshman whose vision of the National Health Service burns like a brand. Bevan wants a sweeping universal service, free at the point of use, funded from general taxation. He loathes half measures, loathes charges, loathes what he sees as accountancy nibbling at principle. On the other flank stands Morrison, not opposed to the NHS, far from it, but wary of promising more than the straight-jacketed budget can bear. He pushes for administrative realism, cost controls, a structure that can stand up under economic storms. Bevan sees a cautious bureaucrat trimming the wings of a dream. Morrison sees a reckless romantic who will make promises the exchequer cannot keep, then walk away when the bills arrive. Between them, Attlee sits, listening, weighing, saying little. The arguments in cabinet are ferocious, though the public rarely sees more than the calm communiques. Voices are raised. Fists slam tables. At one point, Bevan, exasperated by what he sees as Morrison's municipal caution, snaps that he is a gabbling gutter snipe, a wound that will never quite heal. The Prime Minister's job is to choose again and again when it comes to the big symbolic calls, the scale of the NHS, the breadth of the welfare state. Attlee leans towards Bevan's maximalism and away from Morrison's caution. The consequences are double-edged. Historically, Attlee's decisions carve the British welfare state deep into the national psyche. Politically, they also shift the balance of love and loyalty within Labour. To the party's left, Morrison becomes the face of compromise, of limits, of no, not yet. To its right, he is still too radical. He is hammered from both sides, and beneath the policy rows, the older conflict remains. Morrison can feel it in small slights. A phrase of praise for Bevan in a speech where his own name goes unmentioned. A decision to give a key radio broadcast to someone else. A reshuffle that moves him sideways rather than up. Each time, he does what good soldiers are supposed to do. He swallows it. He explains it away. He tells allies, and perhaps himself, that the real prize is the program, not the plaque on the door. But he is not blind. He sees Attlee consolidating his place in history while Herbert Morrison becomes, dangerously, the man blamed when the grand designs hit the gritty reality of coal shortages and balance of payments crises. And always, the next election draws closer. By 1950, he is 62. Too old, some whisper, for a first premiership. If Attlee fights and wins another term, it will be 1954, 1955 before he might feasibly go. By then, Morrison would be nudging 70. 5 years, 3 years, 2. The window is not just closing for Labour's reforms. It is closing for Herbert Morrison's entire life's ambition. The clock, which once ticked for a whole government, now ticks for a single man. The 1950 election nearly slams that window shut. Labour wins again, but the great majority of 1945 is slashed to a razor-thin edge. The new government survives on a handful of seats, its mandate narrower, its room for maneuver dangerously cramped. If there was ever a moment for Attlee to bow out gracefully, this would seem to be it. To hand over to a successor while Labour still governs. To let a new leader refresh the party's image before the grind of austerity erodes it further. Morrison waits. There are murmurs. Memoranda. Private conversations in ministerial cars that smell of leather and nervous sweat. Some think the time has come for a change. Old comrades assure Herbert, again, that he is the natural heir, the organizer, the man who can steady the ship. Attlee listens. Then, with his characteristic, infuriating calm, he refuses to go. He will stay, he says, as long as his health allows, to see the project through. Just like that, Morrison's hour hand jerks forward another few notches. The time left to him shrinks, horribly. He throws himself deeper into the grind. If he cannot replace Attlee, he will at least ensure that the machinery he has built does not seize up. And then Attlee hands him a different prize, glittering but not golden. In 1951, as Ernest Bevan's health crumbles under the weight of years spent wrestling with diplomacy, Attlee reshuffles his cabinet. Morrison is moved from his domestic power base into what has always been considered one of the great offices of state. Foreign Secretary. On the surface, it is a promotion, one of the four great pillars of British government. In practice, it is also a trap. Foreign policy is dominated now by the Cold War. NATO, the Soviet Union, the Korean conflict, the slow exsanguination of empire. It is important, prestigious, but it pulls Morrison away from the domestic field he knows best, the field on which any future labors. Leadership contest will be judged. He cannot refuse without seeming ungrateful, ambitious, disloyal, so he accepts, and walks into the echoing corridors of the Foreign Office, where portraits of Palmerston and Grey stare down from him, paneled walls at this one-eyed product of Lambeth and the co-op movement. The work is hard, technical, endlessly knotty. He grapples with the crisis in Iran, where the nationalization of Anglo-Iranian oil pits a proud new democracy against Britain's lingering imperial reflexes. He must negotiate between American impatience, British commercial interests, and the rising wave of anti-colonial nationalism that threatens to tear old maps to pieces. He wrestles, too, with the question of Europe. The French, the Germans, the Benelux countries are moving towards a new kind of union, pooling coal and steel, dreaming of turning battlefields into common markets. Some in Britain see a chance to shape this new Europe from the start. Morrison is skeptical, instinctively insular, protective of parliamentary sovereignty. In a phrase that will echo for decades, he sums up his view of European integration as being like the Durham miners going into a bus company. It is authentic Morrison. Earthy, municipal, suspicious of grand supranational schemes, history will be divided on whether he was far-sighted or blinkered. But in the shorter term, the real consequence is simpler. His months as Foreign Secretary do nothing to bring him closer to the leadership he still covets. If anything, they entangle him in controversies that will age him further in the public eye. Back home, the domestic front is exploding again. Rearmament for the Korean War gouges great chunks out of the budget. Hugh Gaitskell, the energetic, sharp-minded chancellor, introduces charges for prescription spectacles and dentures to help balance the books. For Aneurin Bevan, now raised into a kind of secular sainthood on the socialist left, this is sacrilege, the first crack in the promise of a free national health service. In a storm of rhetoric and resentment, he resigns from the cabinet, denouncing the government from the outside with the fury of an ex-lover. Suddenly, the Great Labour Project looks less like a united march and more like a civil war. Morrison sides firmly with Attlee and Gaitskell. To him, this is another example of Bevan walking away from the dirty work of compromise, leaving others to hold together a budget. Strained to snapping point, he speaks in Parliament in defense of overall achievement, of the need to protect the whole fabric, even if a few threads must be knotted differently. But the optics are brutal. Bevan becomes the wounded conscience. Gaitskell and Morrison become, in the eyes of many activists, the grey men of caution, the faces of retreat. On the left, the idea of Morrison as future leader curdles into open hostility. Outside Westminster, the electorate is tired. Rationing still bites. Bomb sites still gape. The glow of 1945 is a distant memory. The figure most associated with national pride now is not Attlee, diligent architect of welfare, all but Winston Churchill, still stalking the stage with the rhetoric of defiance and bulldog endurance. In October 1951, Attlee, exhausted, harried by dissent, aware of his wafer-thin majority, makes a decision as fateful as any in his career. He calls an election. Morrison throws himself once more into the trenches of campaigning. Halls, stations, factory gates blur into each other. He warns of the Conservatives' desire to roll back Labour's achievements. He paints vivid pictures of what could be lost. Council houses, free clinics, fair rents, public power. He feels, as he did in 1945, that history is balancing on a knife edge. On polling night, when the counting drags into the small hours, the results deliver a twist so perverse it seems almost personal. Labour wins more votes nationwide than the Conservatives. But under Britain's electoral arithmetic, the distribution of those votes betrays them. Churchill's party wins more seats, and therefore the right to govern. The Attlee government falls. There is no jubilant crowd this time, no eruption of singing in Trafalgar Square. There is only a weary sense of something immense slipping away. In another system, another country, Herbert Morrison might now have his chance. The moment when, after defeat, the old leader steps aside, and the party turns to a battle-hardened deputy to rebuild. But this is Britain. This is Labour. This is Attlee. He does not resign. He stays on as leader of the opposition, the quiet man stubbornly refusing to make way. Some in the party are appalled. Others, still protective of the modest figure who led them through war and peace, cannot bring themselves to force him out. Morrison looks at the parliamentary benches, at the tired faces of his own generation, at the sharp new angles of younger men, Gaitskell, Crossland, Wilson, rising in confidence. He can feel the verdict forming, invisible but inexorable, around him. Too old, too associated with the compromises of office, too bruised by internal wars. The nearly man, again. The great engine of reform he helped build will grind on, in altered, reduced form, long after the Attlee government is gone. Council estates will still stand. Hospitals will still open their doors. Pensions will still arrive with the Morning Post. But Herbert Morrison, who once ruled London like an uncrowned king and bent a whole state's machinery to his will, stands now on the wrong side of an invisible line in time. The countdown that has haunted him since the day Attlee first beat him to the leadership is almost over. And as the Conservatives take back the keys to number 10, Herbert Morrison steps out into the cold London air, wondering how many chances history gives a man before it stops listening altogether. Imagine spending 40 years climbing towards the summit of power, only to discover that every time you reach for the flag, someone quietly moves the mountain. Herbert Morrison steps out of Downing Street in 1951 with defeat in his lungs and frost in the London air. But he is not finished. Not yet. The great offices are gone. The red box is someone else's burden, but there is still a battlefield left that matters almost as much as government itself, the Labour Party. If he cannot rule the country, he will at least try to rule the movement that shaped him. In the years after 1951, the House of Commons feels like a hall of ghosts. Men who once strode through war rooms now jostle for space on the opposition benches. The green leather seems smaller when you're not on the Treasury side. The questions are the same, the rituals the same. But the power that made words turn into action has migrated across the aisle. At the dispatch box opposite, Winston Churchill is back, the old lion reinstalled as Prime Minister. Morrison watches him. This man who once led a coalition in which Morrison himself was Home Secretary and Lord President. Now Churchill's jokes land louder. His barbs cut deeper, because he speaks with the weight of office behind him. The cameras of newsreels linger on Churchill's cigar, not on Morrison's careful, one-eyed glare. Yet within Labour's ranks, Morrison still has a title that counts, Deputy Leader. On paper, that makes him Attlee's number 2, the crown prince in a party where crowns are rare and heavy. In practice, it means he is caught in the most dangerous place any ambitious politician can stand. The narrow bridge between a revered, old leader who will not move, and a restless younger generation that will not wait. The party outside Parliament is seething. Constituency meetings crackle with anger about prescription charges, about rearmament, about what they call betrayals of the 1945 mandate. They do not blame Attlee. He has already been gently lifted into the realm of legend. Instead, they turn their fury on the men who seem to push him towards compromise. Hugh Gaitskell, with his accountant's precision, and Herbert Morrison, with his machine politician's grin. On the left of the party, the name that electrifies rooms now is not Morrison's, but Bevan's. The former Minister of Health, architect of the NHS, martyr of the resignation over charges, draws crowds that look more like revival meetings than branch AGMs. When he speaks, miners and nurses, engineers and clerks rise to their feet and roar. Morrison is invited too, of course. He is still a big beast. But the applause is cooler. When he talks about electoral arithmetic and budgetary limits, you can almost feel the temperature drop. His whole life he has believed in the power of organization, of getting the right people in the right rooms at the right times. Now, the right rooms are slipping away from him. Trade union conferences, constituency parties, the National Executive Committee. Gathering after gathering tilts just a little more towards the Bevanites or the bright young modernizers around Gaitskell. He works harder. He tours the country, his schedule a blur of late trains, tepid tea in church halls, cigarettes in the back of cars that smell of damp wool and petrol. He warns activists that a party that forgets the middle ground will never win power again, that the Tories will laugh all the ways to another decade of office if Labour tears itself apart. He believes every word. But as he scans the rows of faces, lined, tired, proud, he can also see something colder in some eyes. You had your chance, Herbert. You were in government. You were there when Attlee could have gone. You didn't make it happen. Why should we believe you will now? The clock, which once measured 5-year parliaments and 10-year building plans, now ticks in a more intimate rhythm. Morrison is past 65. His hair is thinning. The war, the blitz, the long nights at number 10 have left their marks. When he climbs the narrow stairs to committee rooms, he does it a little more slowly than before. He can do the sums. If Labour loses the next election, Attlee will almost certainly go. The party will need a new leader to face the country. That contest, whenever it comes, is his last real shot. After that, time itself becomes his most ruthless opponent. The rival across the table is no longer only Churchill or Eden or Macmillan. It is the calendar. And it is Hugh Gaitskell. Gaitskell is everything Morrison is not. Younger, fresher, a wartime civil servant turned politician with the smooth assurance of Oxford and the Treasury stamped into his vowels. He admires Morrison's organizational genius, but he does not fear him. To Gaitskell's generation, Morrison is already half a figure of the past, the man of tram lines and town halls, not the man of television and the atomic age. Between them, a quiet contest begins. Morrison still has the title. Gaitskell has momentum. Both know that when Attlee finally bows out, the party will not have an endless menu of options. The next leader will almost certainly be one of them, unless Bevan somehow storms the citadel, or the party tears itself into fatal pieces first. All the while, the public clock ticks too. In 1955, Anthony Eden, Churchill's sleek heir, goes to the country to seek his own mandate. Attlee, frail but stubborn, leads Labour for one last time. Morrison stands behind him, the loyal deputy, his face a mix of hope and calculation. He campaigns as if this were his own election, because, in a sense, it is, if Labour wins, Attlee might feel he has earned the right to step down on a high, hand over a majority government to his successor. If Labour loses, he will almost certainly leave anyway. In either case, the leadership contest Morrison has dreamed about since the 1920s will finally, after decades of false starts and near misses, become a living thing. Polling day comes. Ballot boxes are carried through drizzle into school halls. Counts are held under harsh strip lights, while party agents scribble figures in notebooks and smoke nervously. When the results steady, the verdict is clear. Labour has lost. Not in the crushing landslide of the 1930s, not in humiliation, but lost decisively enough that Eden can stride into Downing Street, with a Commons majority and a confident smile. In the quiet after the numbers, in offices where ashtrays overflow and tired MPs slump in armchairs, a different kind of drama begins. Clement Attlee, that wry, infuriatingly composed figure, finally does what Morrison has been waiting half a lifetime to hear. He announces that he will stand down. It should be Morrison's moment. He has been deputy leader for a decade. He has shepherded the party through war, peace, triumph, and now defeat. He knows the rules, knows the members, knows the map of Labour's factions like the map of London bus routes imprinted on his brain. He begins to move. He pays visits. He writes letters. Old loyalties are stirred. He reminds union leaders of battles fought together, MPs of favors done, seats defended, crises managed. In the tea rooms and the whip's offices, the question hangs in cigarette haze. Is it Herbert's turn at last? Then, almost without warning, the ground tilts. A cluster of influential MPs, restless for change, declares for Gaitskell. They talk about the need for a new generation, for modernization, for a leader who can face the television cameras with easy charm. Behind them, economists, policy thinkers, rising stars begin to line up. Morrison is stunned by the speed of it. He had expected a measured, almost ceremonial progression. The loyal deputy finally elevated, the party grateful to an old warhorse, before perhaps moving on to someone younger in a few years. Instead, he finds himself dragged into a brutal three-cornered fight. Morrison, Gaitskell, and Bevan. The old triangular war inside Labour, right, center, left, suddenly condenses into three human faces. For Morrison, it is a nightmare configuration. Against Bevan, he is the safe administrator, the man who kept the show on the road when the Dreamers stormed off in protest. Against Gaitskell, he is the aging veteran, the man of yesterday, while the younger challenger promises to be both responsible and fresh. He campaigns anyway. He attends party meetings where the applause for him is polite, the applause for Bevan thunderous, the listening for Gaitskell attentive and curious. He speaks of experience, of having done the job in everything but name, of knowing how the state works from the inside out. Privately, he tells friends that the party cannot seriously risk Bevan, too divisive, too distrusted by the right and the press, and that Gaitskell, for all his talents, simply hasn't been tested by fire the way he has. But the Labour MPs who will actually decide the leadership have eyes. They can count birthdays. They can see the country shifting, television replacing wireless, a new consumer society emerging from the rubble, a generation coming, of age that has no memory of pre-war slums or cable trams. On the day of the leadership ballot in 1955, Morrison waits while the votes are read. The numbers fall like cold rain. Gaitskell sweeps ahead. Bevan comes second. Morrison, the official deputy, the one-time uncrowned King of London, the man who ran half a nation's reconstruction, limps in last. It is not merely defeat. It is humiliation. In a single afternoon, the party he devoted his life to brands him as yesterday's man. The crown he reached for across 4 decades is handed, with a curious mixture of enthusiasm and anxiety, to a politician almost 20 years his junior. When he emerges from the committee room, reporters crowd around, their notebooks poised for bitterness. Morrison smiles, or something close to it. He delivers the expected words about unity, about rallying behind the new leader, about the party always coming first, but his eyes betray him. There is a faraway look, a kind of internal audit in progress. All the late nights, all the cabinet papers, all the battles fought, in the LCC and in wartime committees, and in the subterranean machinery of the state, measured against a simple, brutal outcome, twice beaten by Attlee, now beaten by Gaitskell. The mountain has moved again. He resigns the deputy leadership soon after. The party does not ask him to stand aside. He reads the need in the air. A new team must be seen to lead, unshadowed by the old machine boss from Lambeth. For a man whose identity has been welded to office, to titles, to the sense of being at the control panel, the adjustment is savage. He is still an MP, still called Mr. Morrison in the chamber, but the dispatch box feels further away than ever. He speaks on issues, on London, on transport, on constitutional questions. But he can feel the benches around him already recalculating his importance. And yet, history has another twist in store. In 1959, as the long conservative ascendancy under Macmillan rolls on, Morrison is offered something he once might have derided as a bauble of the establishment. A life peerage, Baron Morrison of Lambeth. The title is almost a joke he has written himself. Formal recognition grafted onto the name of the hard, crowded district that shaped him, Lambeth in Ermine. The boy who left school early and sold vegetables at a market stall, now to sit among the scarlet-robed and bewigged guardians of the old Constitution. He accepts. Some of his old comrades shake their heads, others slap him on the back. The Lords has long been, to many socialists, the very symbol of an ossified class system. But Morrison, ever the practical reformer rather than the purist, sees an opportunity as well as a ritual. If the British state is a machine, the House of Lords is one of its older, more eccentric cogs. Why should it be left entirely to conservatives and hereditary peers? He crosses the corridor. The first time he walks into the House of Lords chamber, the visual shock would almost make a caricaturist's hand itch. Herbert Morrison, yet with his battered face and cockney inflections, moving among men whose families have centuries of titles behind them. The red benches glow under the gilded ceiling. The air smells faintly of dust and old leather. On the walls, heraldic shields blaze with symbols of dynasties he had once fought in the streets of South London with leaflets and loudspeakers. He takes his seat without apology. From this eccentric vantage point, he watches a new Britain taking shape. He sees tower blocks rising where rows of terraced slums once stood, sometimes applauding, sometimes wincing at their brutal silhouettes. He sees the National Health Service, which he once tried to trim and manage, become a near-sacred fixture in public life. He sees conservative governments, for all their rhetoric, quietly keep most of Labour's post-war settlement in place. The country, in concrete and custom, is becoming unmistakably Attleean. But look closely, and it is also Morrisonian. The nationalized industries he midwifed hum and clank. The new towns he pushed through planning committees grow into real communities, with schools and shops and bus routes. The London County Council estates he fathered are still full of families whose first decent bathroom, first front door, first garden came because some Morrisonian machine in County Hall decreed it. He writes too. In articles and books, he lays out his view of government, of planning, of the delicate dance between parliament and bureaucracy. There is pride in those pages, but also an undertone of defensiveness, as if he senses that the verdict of posterity might not instinctively tilt his way. At home, a new generation argues politics around the dining table. His granddaughter, Shirley, bright, sharp-tongued, adored by him, is coming of age in a Britain very different from the one that shaped his instincts. She loves her grandfather, but she is also restless with some of his certainties, his fondness for central control, his suspicion of anything that looks like middle-class liberalism. Years later, she will become Shirley Williams, one of the most famous labor rebels of her time, then a founding member of the Social Democratic Party, a direct challenge to the labor machine Morrison helped build. It is a private, almost poetic twist of history. The man who spent his life welding labor into a disciplined electoral force will see, from beyond the grave, his own blood help pull it apart and reassemble it in a new shape. As the 1960s begin, the world shifts again. Harold Macmillan tells voters they have never had it so good. Consumer goods flood homes that once barely had electricity. The grim austerity that defined Morrison's prime is replaced with washing machines, televisions, pop music. In London, the Conservatives embark on a reform that strikes at the heart of his old empire. The London County Council, his beloved instrument, the vehicle of his rise, the institution he regarded as the model of modern municipal socialism, is abolished, replaced by the Greater London Council and a patchwork of new boroughs. From the red benches of the Lords, he watches the legislation grind through. It is like witnessing the demolition of a building you designed yourself. He protests, of course. He makes speeches about the effectiveness of the LCC, its record in education, housing, planning. He lists achievements, the kind of achievements that can be measured in hospital beds and school places, not just in slogans. But the tide is running the other way. The Conservatives want new structures. Even some modernizers on the left think the old LCC boundaries out of date. The machine Morrison built is declared obsolete by a generation that barely remembers how radical it once was. His health begins to fray. The long days are fewer now. The House of Lords sees him less often. Those who visit him notice the thickening waistline, the slower step, the way he sometimes drifts into stories of the past as if the present were a slightly puzzling interruption. He lives long enough to see Harold Wilson, another once young rebel of the 1950s, become labor leader and then prime minister in 1964. Wilson is, in some ways, the kind of leader Morrison might have approved of. Clever, managerial, fascinated by the white heat of technology, as keen on efficiency as on equality. But he is also the man whose rise definitively closes the door on Morrison's generation. No one is now waiting to see if Herbert Morrison will become prime minister. That question, which once consumed whole careers and newspaper columns, has faded into a historian's what if. On a March day in 1965, Herbert Morrison's story finally runs out of time. He dies at 77, in a Britain utterly unlike the one he was born into in 1888. A Britain with a welfare state, with publicly owned power and transport, with a capital city whose skyline bears the imprint of his hand as surely as its politics bear his absence. The obituaries are respectful but oddly cool. They call him the great municipal reformer, the master of organization, Attlee's lieutenant. They note, with a hint of condescension, his Cockney humor and his love of committees. They list his offices, his roles, his services. They do not call him what, in his own mind, he had always been meant to be, prime minister. And yet, walk through London, or through the new towns, or past an NHS hospital's sliding doors, or along a suburban street where once there were Victorian slums, and you can feel the shape of a different verdict. Herbert Morrison never got the top job, but the Britain he helped to build, practical, planned, sometimes over-centralized, often maddening, but immeasurably fairer than the world of his childhood, did not need his name on the brass plate to carry his fingerprints. His rival won the title. His rival's statue stands in Parliament Square, but in the quiet, everyday revolutions of hot water from a council flat tap, of a miner's son treated in a clean public hospital, of a bus gliding through streets mapped by long-forgotten LCC planners, the hand on the lever is still, inescapably, his.